Good morning on Thursday, November 30th, episode 325 of the 359 podcast. You know me, I'm BVG, and your host today, the OGs, the heroes of the internet. It's Ben Fox, Rubin, and Roger Cheng.
No, we're not.
Yay!
Hey, so we're going to be talking about devoting the entire show to net neutrality. You know, obviously the headlines haven't stopped. There have been tons of news that's popped up on net neutrality. We're going to have another discussion, another debate again about, the true impact of net neutrality and whether or not the FCC's attempts to roll back the existing rules really is going to destroy the internet.
And democracy itself.
And democracy and life and society and everything.
So we'll get
let's
into
have at
it.
it. So, if you have any questions, love to take your questions on this because I just love to discuss net neutrality. If you have any, leave them in the comments section. Brian will pick out the best. We will get to them in 3 minutes and 59 seconds.
From 3, 2...
Welcome to the 359. I'm Roger Cheng.
I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
The net neutrality debate is heating up. Over the last few days, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai has been on a media tour defending his proposal to roll back the existing rules. He actually points his finger at Twitter. Says, it's really the source of the real
target.
Problem for the open internet. It is an easy target. I mean, AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson yesterday said there's no need for bomb shelters or canned goods. So, we want to really kind of get into this, and this, especially this point that Ajit Pai kind of brings up, that Twitter is actually more of a problem for the open internet. His justification is, Twitter is now taking a little bit more of an active hand in, censoring, but definitely stopping content that's deemed inappropriate or removing. They're in the process of reviewing the verification of certain accounts, right? Depending on who you are and the content that you speak. Ajit Pai's argument here then is that they're censoring what you see on the internet more than
a repeal would be.
Right.
Yeah, and I quote from Ajit Pai, the company has a viewpoint and uses that viewpoint to discriminate. The problem is that they're not the government, right? So Twitter is obviously an easy target. There are a lot of problems with Twitter, but at the same time, they're a private industry, and there are alternatives to Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing is that like Facebook and Twitter, they call themselves platforms, but really these are companies. They're not beholden to the public. They're beholden to their shareholders. And if they want to flex their legal perspective or their political perspective, like they can't. The government. That's the whole point. The government shouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. But that being said, I would probably agree to a certain point with AT&T CEO and Ajit Pai that the rhetoric has absolutely reached like a pretty intense froth. And Pai goes out of his way to call out Alyssa Milano, who for some reason is now an expert on net neutrality, saying that it will destroy democracy itself. That's very, very questionable, in my opinion. Again, these are my opinions on this, but at the same time, I don't my central issue with this is that net neutrality started in 2015.
Yep.
A lot of the gloom and doom that was supposed to happen due to net neutrality, it didn't happen in prior years before this regulatory regime was created.
Well, okay, 2 points on those points, they're all fair. I don't think the world is going to go crashing down when these rules get repealed because, as you said, before 2015, nothing terrible was happening. There were steps that the carriers were starting to take that showed that in terms of prioritizing traffic, like that was the thing they were going to do. And I think that is still a thing they will do. The world is going to come crashing down the day after, or maybe the week or the year after. What the concern I think is over the longer term, some of these actions the ISPs are now would be free to take would have longer term lasting damage to the internet and how it works.
Such as
paid prioritization. The idea of creating these fast lanes. To basically give preference to their own services. Maybe this doesn't happen right away, but it happens down the line. Theoretically, I'm not saying AT&T would do this, but giving priority access to DirecTV Now to make sure that video service always streams super clearly, whereas competitive services like Netflix or YouTube, have to either pay or end up with buffering or quality issues with their video.
Right, and that sounds crappy, obviously, for consumers, but is it destructive to democracy, it's debatable.
It is debatable. I mean, look, the fact here is that with the repeal of these rules, there will be no guidelines. There are no consequences for these companies, and I think that's what's more worrisome. That these companies, basically, we have to trust these companies to do the right thing, and I don't know.
I trust Comcast. I can't even say that with a straight face.
Well, look, that's the issue. Is these companies? And I've always said these companies aren't inherently evil or good. All they make money. That's their entire purpose, right? And so whatever it takes to make more money is what they're probably going to end up pursuing, right? And so for things like fast lanes and paid prioritization, that's a lucrative potential business for these companies.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't get to all of this in 4 minutes. I'm shocked.
I know. It's a complicated issue. We're probably going to have another discussion ahead of the net neutrality vote, which is on December 14th. But till then, check us out on CNET. I'm Roger Cheng.
I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
Thanks for listening.
Where do we go from here?
Okay, I have a point. I have a point that we didn't get to, which is the matter of investment.
Yes.
So Ajit Pai mentions that investment from broadband and wireless infrastructure, or investment for broadband and wireless infrastructure, was down in the past 2 years since net neutrality passed.
Which
down $3.6 billion, it's 5%. And he claims that that's the first time investment from ISPs has actually been down since the internet era started.
So he definitely sliced and diced the numbers in a very specific way to present his argument. Yes, I think the total number of spending has gone down, but you have to remember in the years past, we had huge amounts of investments from companies like Verizon in Fios, in laying down fiber. And they ended that project before net neutrality, before any of that net neutrality stuff really took off, right? And so there's that, and there's the fact that a lot of the wireless investment, or the investment in telecom, is converted from more expensive wireline to more efficient wireless, right? Rather than running through physical lines, all you have to do is string up a box, or
right, or put up a
updates.
tower.
Not even put up a tower, because those towers are there. They literally put a box on a tower. It's a lot less expensive than building the tower itself, or digging up the actual ground to lay down lines. That is way more expensive.
I think those are all fair points. I would argue, though, that under net neutrality, the incentive to invest is significantly reduced. If you're not allowed to charge anybody any more or less for a better or worse service, what is the point in improving your service?
The point
you can just give everybody the same crappy service.
The point is competition, because look, we've got 4 national wireless carriers, and they're all right now they're beating each other up trying to get you to switch over their business, and everyone's moving to 5G. No one's not moving to 5G. No one's not investing in these next generation networks. And net neutrality, these rules aren't going to affect that. Whether or not the rules are in place, these companies still have to invest because they need to be competitive. It makes sense if, for instance, if it was just Comcast, or if it was just Verizon, or it was just T-Mobile,
which is
by
the
itself.
case.
Well, no,
on the broadband side for home access,
but on the wireless side, that's not the case, right? There are still lots of competitors. I would agree to that point that in terms of the home broadband side, competition isn't quite there. But I would say on the wireless side, and that's really where everything is going anyways, there is still money being poured into these networks, regardless of whether or not there are rules.
Hold on. Are you arguing that 5G will allow me to cut the cord completely, and I would just be a Verizon wireless customer, and that way that would be my broadband home connection? I
mean, look, it's not going to be as simple as that, but Verizon just announced yesterday that they're going to start introducing residential 5G service in 5 cities in the U.S. next year, starting with Sacramento. So imagine, instead of a cable box or a DSL modem, you have a 5G modem sitting at home. It has basically a direct wireless link to whatever Verizon facility center is nearby, and you're getting 100 gigs of speed,
which would
completely
actually ensure. I mean, the problem has always been that broadband providers are essentially regional monopolies,
right?
And that would actually ensure some real competition in the marketplace. That's been the issue with Verizon Fios. I think Verizon Fios, and also Google Fiber to a certain extent, was viewed as a potential competitor to try to puncture those monopolies, and for whatever reason, they both fell apart.
Well,
Fios still exists.
Didn't fall apart. It just became part of the machine. It's just as it uses the same business practices as the cable companies, right? Like in terms of like sort of complicated pricing packages, the bundles. It's essentially another cable company that's a competitor, which is fine, whatever. Google Fiber was sort of this true kind of disruptive force, but it fell apart because it was just so expensive to build ground infrastructure.
And so the wireless 5G idea would be the potential white knight.
Now, and by the way, I do want to bring up the point in terms of fast lanes. The AT&T CEO yesterday actually brought up an interesting point. In certain situations, actually, fast lanes do make sense, whether it's healthcare applications.
Why don't we hold on? Tell people what fast lanes is.
Oh, sorry, fast lane. Well, we were talking about paid prioritization. The idea that a company like AT&T or Verizon would charge a customer or sort of the back-end customer, not the consumer.
Right, like Netflix.
Like a Netflix, more money to guarantee faster guaranteed service to the customer. Now, we've been using video as the primary example of why that's like terrible, because like basically Netflix would have to pay more to ensure video gets delivered to you, and they can theoretically pass those charges down to you. But in certain situations like self-driving cars or maybe a robot surgeon that requires a cell connection, you would want to pay extra for that, right? Like that in those situations,
there are direct safety issues.
Yeah, there are safety issues there, and that you'd actually want to pay for. You want to be able to allow for that kind of level of priority access.
Okay, and in that case, would a net neutrality regime like not allow ISPs or wireless providers to charge more for those types of high-level connections?
That's the thing. Those existing rules were a little bit less clear with the mobile side of things. And so, and look, when the former FCC chairman, Tom Wheeler, brought those rules about, he also noted that, like, we're not going to follow everything to the letter of the law in terms of the utilities. Like, they theoretically could use those rules to enforce, but they also were trying to open those rules up to the point where they were going to be flexible enough with modern technology. Like, it was this is where it gets really complicated, where like the debate kind of gets a little bit blurred. The reason why Title II was brought in was because it offered a legal framework for the FCC to use to enforce these rules. It didn't mean they actually had to enforce them all. It just meant that they had the backing.
And Title II being utility style.
Right. The same rules that are used to enforce the telephone companies. Right. Which every company, every ISP, every internet service provider hates, because it's like, oh, it's more rules, more regulations.
Yeah,
but
it's way more rules than they had to deal with
again,
before.
it was clear like the FCC didn't have to use those rules to enforce, certain situations, but they could if they wanted to, if there was an abuse of power.
I don't know. It's interesting you mentioned that, because it's a similar argument as, under the Ajit Pai consideration, we're giving the ISPs more power that they could potentially abuse. But under net neutrality, the FCC is now granted utility level powers that they could potentially abuse against the ISPs.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me that the ISPs would obviously dislike net neutrality, because the FCC could use it as a bludgeon against them if they wanted to.
Absolutely. So ultimately, like there was no great middle ground. Like everyone says, the middle ground should be Congress. Congress needs to step in and create rules.
What? Congress doing anything?
Yeah.
Are you sure that's a good idea?
Yeah, I don't know.
So what I'm hearing here is it's essentially a case of hate the player, not the game. It's the ISPs that can be held accountable. However, I see exorbitant amounts of potential abuse in these situations. Now, I like that you brought up the consideration for being able to prioritize speeds to doctors and important rescue vehicles.
Safety reasons.
Right.
For safety reasons.
Sure.
That's magnificent. How many consumers suffer at the hands of that? I like this analogy that came up in the chat from Joseph. He says net neutrality is equivalent to forcing all restaurants to offer all-you-can-eat buffets. Now, that's a really interesting way to look at it, but I'd like to tack onto that from my own personal perspective with a giant credit card premium over top of all of it potentially.
That's if net neutrality gets rolled back, you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily would fully accept that analogy. Like, I think net neutrality would allow every restaurant basically fair game in terms of opening their business. They could basically create whatever restaurant or whatever business they want. They could offer whatever food they want. But I think the idea is that there'd be some sort of level playing field for every restaurant. Say, I guess I'm thinking like at a strip mall, right? There'd be equal spots for every single restaurant. You can do whatever you want with that spot, but the point is that there's no prioritization. There's no preference being pay to McDonald's over some mom and pop shop.
I would argue that the primary issue is a matter of competition. The problem is that, you know, the companies are going to do as best they can to make as much money as they can, and the thing that prevents them from doing that is competition. And the problem has been and continues to be that the regional monopolies from ISPs, broadband providers, and it's interesting that you mentioned 5G could actually solve some of those problems, because regardless of whether it's under net neutrality or without net neutrality, nobody wants to see customers end up getting screwed and have to pay more money or have to, you know, be buffered.
Wait,
or
nobody wants to see that? I mean, imagine.
We don't want to see that. We don't. You know, look, I think it's obviously we do not want to see customers, because we're customers, end up getting screwed and just have to pay more for worse service. I mean, like, that would be obviously
by the way,
a far worse situation.
I do want to at least allow for the fact that in terms of customers ultimately paying more, that is like I think that's a way long-term nightmare scenario. Like, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Really? It only took 2 years for Time Warner to screw me over.
Well, all right, maybe just for Brian then. But I would just say, like, in terms of it being sort of this broad practice that everyone just sort of jumps into, like, they're not going to start like, maybe Netflix. The other issue is that companies like Netflix are probably willing to stomach the costs. Whether they'll pass it on to the customer is debatable. Maybe they'll do it over time.
Because this will get repealed if it goes
through.
No.
The bigger issue is less about Netflix, but like the next Netflix, right? The idea that if you're this small company, small startup trying to, you know, create your own video app, like, all of a sudden you have to pay this extra premium, and if you can't pay this premium,
your service is worse than Netflix.
Your service is worse than Netflix,
right.
And thus you can't stay in business. And
yeah,
so
I
really,
still,
like, a Netflix is not going to be threatened or damaged by this at all, because in fact they're a bigger player. They might have an edge because of this, because it's really the smaller players that you have to worry about. Like,
right, but Netflix's profits would be impacted, I would say, because they could potentially end up having to pay more.
Yeah, for sure. But I would say
be impacted.
The impact would be a lot less than, you know, the next startup trying to be.
I also don't. I don't really understand why Google and Netflix are arguing for these potential future startup competitors. It doesn't actually make that much sense to me.
No,
like, why are they saying, like,
I think
we want a free and open internet under net neutrality because we want to ensure that our future competitor that's going to eat our lunch could do that.
Well, like, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, there is a recognition that they could not exist without the idea of the open internet, because the open internet fostered their ability to become giant companies, and so they're honoring that principle. It's also good PR, right?
It's
this
good
is a very,
PR.
very
it's good PR, and they came.
Rules.
Netflix and Google did not start in 2015 under net neutrality. They continued to grow under rules that were much lighter touch, which is what IGPI is arguing.
Well, the only issue is, like, the practices that I think everyone's afraid of didn't really become a legitimate threat until, you know, a few years ago, a few years before the net neutrality debate really started getting hot. So you could argue about, like, whether or not the lack of rules had any impact, because, I mean, a lot of those techniques weren't available yet.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to questions,
by
the way.
We've just been talking. Sorry.
This is it's
great conversation, though,
issue.
and it's really engaging, and we've gotten a lot of commentary. I would just, from my own personal perspective on this, as a customer, the critical flaw in this entire plan is that you don't have a lot of options for your ISP providers where you are. I literally have one. So that means I am prisoner to their terms and services until I move.
Do you have one or two?
I have one.
Right.
I have
one. I'm one of the lucky few.
And I think that's
two.
disturbing and disgusting until they can find another way to actually evenly distribute some of these providers. Then this is a complete bunk argument.
You just have cable or just have telecom?
I just have telecom.
There's no cable provider in your... Wait.
I have Spectrum.
Spectrum's a cable company. But
okay.
You don't have Verizon as an option?
Not in my neighborhood.
Really? The Verizon DSL, not Fios?
Not to my knowledge. Every time I mean, maybe it's changed in the last month, but the last time I looked it up, it said it wasn't available.
If you looked up Fios isn't available. I'm willing to bet Verizon basic DSL is available. The other issue is DSL is not as fast.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
But you do have two ISPs.
Right, but DSL is not really that competitive. It's not broadband, is it? Yeah. So.
Oh, it is broadband. Well, Okay?
Ish.
Kind of
I'm
broad
sticking with the
brush.
principles of my argument, however.
All right.
I still find it damaging. And as somebody who, for a career, provides content on the internet, I don't want to see anyone else in control of that.
Right. So what are some of the questions? Or comments?
Well, let's go right in and start taking some of the commentary. Matthew Datcher says, I like the spirit of net
Datch.
neutrality, especially when it comes to the consumer end of the internet. However, as an engineer, the wording is problematic. Traffic engineering and quality of service are important aspects of moving data across the internet. He's got fantastic points.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear an expansion on that and to kind of bridge off the concept of, the negative aspects of net neutrality. We're already kind of getting, may I dicked around from people like YouTube, Google, and Twitter, as Drone Wolf Media points out. If Facebook, all the social media, they're in control of the media, of what you consume.
Right.
So the idea is, like, are we really handing that traffic direction off to better people in this?
Well, that's the bit. It depends on whether or not, I guess, you trust a Verizon and an AT&T more than you trust a Google or a Facebook.
I don't trust any of them.
Yeah, I think
Nor
that's
should you.
it's sort of a no-win situation there, right?
Yeah.
And the other point we wanted to bring up is, like, this is a very partisan issue, right? When the Democrats are in control, it's pro-net neutrality, pro-net neutrality rules. When the Republicans are in control, it is maybe still pro-net neutrality concept, but no rules, right? So, we had under Obama the rules put in. Under Trump, rules are coming out. If theoretically a Democratic president comes in the next term, we could have this debate all over again.
Yeah,
and it could
it's
happen
entirely possible.
and it could just be back and forth, like a whiplash effect for the next 100 years.
Isn't that essentially all politics?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but like with this especially, there's a lot of investment that goes into it, and a lot of businesses say that they would like to have some level of expectation so
Yeah.
they can be confident to spend this money. So I don't see that as a positive for anybody, that you're just going to have net neutrality get taken out and put back in over and over and over again, depending on who's in charge in the White
that
House.
becomes the norm. Just like, oh wait, it's the Democrats again. All right, let's roll back the plans.
Right.
Michael Brown says, I believe the loss of net neutrality will force companies to create partnership bundles with ISPs. Comcast has already created their ecosystem for service providing. Do we think that's a slippery slope?
Bundles in terms of like with content providers like Netflix, or
Assuming that's what he meant.
Right. That's one of the nightmare scenarios
Yeah.
that a lot of people have been talking
that, like,
about.
you have to pay the extra $5 to get your premium access to Netflix.
Right. Or like you get the social bundle or
Right,
whatever.
right.
I think that argument, at least in the short and medium term, is to me a red herring.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. I think the first ISP or broadband provider that actually attempts to do that, like, people will riot in the streets and freak out. I just don't
It
actually
really depends
expect
on
that to
how it would be
happen.
done. Like, if you didn't pay for the bundle, would you like not get access to like Facebook?
One other potential would be that instead of doing a straight out bundle and saying you don't have access to this otherwise, maybe providing faster or better access, or like 4K access or whatever. So they treat it more as a positive than a negative. Like, if you don't pay us,
You are way more optimistic than I, sir.
No, I'm saying that would be a way for them to convince you to pay more money and then spinning it as a positive. I'm not trying to say
I don't
it's
know
it's
I don't know how
optimistic.
effective it is to do that with throttling for websites per se. Like, websites all kind of load pretty fast. Like, they have to like really dramatically slow it down to make it worse, right? I mean, for me, the biggest issue is in video, right? Because that's the one that takes a lot of bandwidth, requires a lot of bandwidth,
And the cord cutters.
and the core. I'm just saying video. Yeah, video in general.
Well, I'm
like-
saying that it's going to usurp cable television, over-the-air television eventually.
Oh yeah.
It's been in
but
that
So it
that's
needs to be a
direction.
priority.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, that's the one where, like, do they deprioritize or prioritize that? Like, you would see a drastic impact if they prioritize or deprioritize video versus, like, Facebook loads pretty quick wherever you are,
Yeah,
right?
and if it loads like a second longer, is that really going to be a problem?
Right.
I still think you're being way more optimistic. I think it could be potentially a lot worse than that. I foresee a lot of gatekeeping going on. Josh Boyda asks, will ISPs be able to use their power to censor political beliefs or will they just be able to create the fast lanes for the certain services? I think
Right.
it's all on the table.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
He mentions that because
Yeah.
that was Ajit Pai's exact
Right.
argument about Twitter.
Yep.
Is censoring political beliefs that they're doing currently. I mean, like I'm not going to take a position one way or another related to Twitter.
This
but
is an ecosystem of animosity. We're going to be pitting ISPs at wars with actual content creators or managers.
Maybe I'm naive, but I don't think the ISPs would censor based on political beliefs. It just they're
Well, it depends on where the checks are coming and going from.
But to your point, it's about money. It's like who's paying for what. But that's not about politics. That's about business.
It eventually can be about politics, and oftentimes has proven to be the case. Look
Maybe.
how many paid congressmen there are.
they're all paid.
They're all
You
We
know
paid them
what
all.
you know what I mean.
And well, look,
Including Ajit Verizon Pi, Mr. Corruptible already.
this is from what I haven't looked at the political contributions of the major telcos, but generally speaking, if you're a big enough company,
They're all pretty massive.
You pay both sides.
Yeah.
You pay Republicans and you
Yeah,
pay
yeah,
Democrats
sure.
because you're picking a winner regardless of who actually gets voted in.
All right. Ryan Reiser, what country should I move to if this goes bad? I can move to any European country because of family. What should I do?
I was gonna say
What?
India. I was gonna say India. 'Cause
That
they
would
just,
actually-
they just passed super strict net neutrality rules.
Yeah.
That's
And I
that's
think in
interesting.
the EU, I believe there are already net neutrality rules in place. So you're like covered in the EU. I wouldn't suggest UK, obviously,
because of Brexit.
because of Brexit.
Okay, if you do actually end up moving to Europe because net neutrality got rolled back,
You should just move to Europe because it's a nice
please
place.
contact us because we would love to profile you.
Oh, yeah.
And be like, this guy left the United States over net neutrality rules. So I don't know that a lot of people would do that, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean that's really sticking to your principles, I guess.
Expanding on that, Nicola in the chat says Computer File had a very nice, balanced, calm video about net neutrality from the UK perspective. So we want to point out and shout out Computer File. Go on and check that out
Oh,
if
cool.
you're interested for some of the more international impacts that this could have.
Definitely.
Josh Boyda, how likely do you think it is that ISPs will police themselves and keep things the same as it is now?
Yeah, that's the $1 million
It's a big
question. Is you got
question.
you like
That's what we're
ultimately.
yeah.
Do you trust your ISP to do the right thing?
And most ISPs have terrible reputations.
Right. So-
it's very hard to defend them. I mean, like you're talking about Time Warner Cable, now called Spectrum, Comcast. Like anytime
Well-
there are consumer surveys, they tend to go way on the bottom.
So beyond that, because I feel like these companies it's easy to rag on these companies. What's I think more striking to me is I want to bring up this point, zero rating. This is a concept in wireless where you can offer someone service or data or like video and not have it eat into your data cap. Basically, like YouTube, for instance, can pay Verizon to ensure that you can watch all the YouTube videos you want and it doesn't hurt your data cap, right? And so, what a lot of these companies did early on last year, AT&T, for instance, Verizon offered Go90, its video service, as a zero-rated service, which meant you could watch all the Go90 video you wanted, and it didn't hurt your data cap, which is great, right? You can watch as much except there's nothing on Go90.
Right.
So, but that right there, the FCC under the previous administration actually took the carriers to task and were actually investigating the carriers for this practice because it was anti-competitive. The idea that you're prioritizing your own services, you're making it easier or more beneficial for the customer to use your service over somebody else's. And then once Ajit Pai, the new administration came in, he basically squashed that. He squashed that whole investigation. It's like, oh, whatever, it's fine.
Right. So your argument, we talked about this ahead of the show.
Yeah.
Your argument was that zero rating could be utilized as a blueprint in the future by ISPs.
Right. It's basically they've clearly set precedent that they're cool with prioritization of their own services, and so if there are new rules in place, that they could very easily take that and repeat it with other services.
Right. My argument to that is I don't think anybody's not watching YouTube or Facebook or video on Facebook or whatever because it is or isn't eating into your data cap. I understand the point in prioritizing, but at the same time, it's not preventing consumers from consuming what they want.
All right, we got time for just a couple more. One more from Datch. I thought I heard a rumor that Comcast dropped net neutrality language from their agreement. From their agreements. Any truth to that?
Yeah, it's a little bit mixed. They did drop some language about promising. I think they promised not to offer fast lanes. This whole prioritization we've been talking about. Maggie Reardon actually wrote a story, I think 2 days ago, on this issue, and Comcast had gone back to her and said that they had no plans to do pay prioritization, at least for now.
I thought the fast lanes was the
Isn't
whole
that
reason they're
the
arguing
ultimate
for this.
end all be all of this entire conversation? Like, for now, it's okay. For now,
Well,
what happens tomorrow?
Yeah, the comment that they have is Comcast hasn't entered into any pay prioritization agreements, period, and we have no plans to do so.
Sorry,
at
I'm
least
sorry.
going
That's
forward.
BS. This is way too exploitable.
Right.
Well,
You know,
first
need-
of all,
I
net
want
neutrality
roadmaps.
hasn't been repealed yet. So
I want
that is
roadmaps from these people.
Right.
Right, and they probably don't want to give them to you. And the
course
question
not.
is that if this thing is okay, then what's the next thing that's not okay? What are the new red lines that are actually going to be established?
What's the thing? There are no red lines.
Right. Well, there will be from consumers. I mean, like, I do think
Right.
that consumers will go against some of this stuff if it does create these nightmare scenarios that people don't actually like. And if there
But that's the
isn't-
thing. Like, what can you do if you're a consumer and if you're like not happy with this? I mean, can you walk away? Except the competition's doing the exact same thing. So, like, what's your
Well, there
recourse?
is no competition,
Right,
right?
well,
like
yeah,
if you have a broadband provider, that's the only one. But you can argue against it and, create a lot of
But
negative
argue
press
against it.
against them.
What does that do though?
It's a good question. I don't
That's-
know.
that's
Like,
the
would they
thing.
end up buckling under that pressure, or would they just say, "Screw you"? There's no one else that you could actually go to.
Yeah, definitely
We're
the
just
latter.
gonna- It's possible. It's entirely
knows.
possible.
As
Right,
a 14-year customer of Time Warner Spectrum, due to lack of options, they're gonna screw you over. Come get me. Anyways, we are almost out of time.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up a comment from Ryan Reiser, who's a man after my own heart right now. As a techie, I'm terrified. There are just too many people that don't understand this. On that note, we hope that we're trying to help round things out.
Yeah.
I know
That's
there
why
was
we're having
lots,
these debates. I mean,
there's
discussions.
a lot of conversation and commentary in the chat about, like, I don't know how to explain this to my family. My mom
Yeah.
doesn't care, and it's like, this is why you should care. And I mean, even I feel like I have a grasp on it, but I'm just
look,
I'm just angry and
Well,
threatened
no,
and backed
I
into a
think
corner as I
Not an
hoard
easy
all
one.
of my internet into canteens and hide in the basement.
Right.
Look, part of the real problem with net neutrality, it is a very complicated and wonky topic, and there is a temptation to like sum it up in the most dramatic way to get people to care. Like, this is the ISPs censoring what you see now. Like, it's not. The truth of it is, it's not going to be that dramatic. It's going to be something, but it may not be that. But
Well, the
I
easy
think that's
black and
why-
white look at this is censorship is always bad.
That's the thing. It's not as black and white as that. So we don't know.
No,
what's
but that
gonna
is
happen.
I'm saying that is the knee-jerk reaction. It's the
Right.
reaction I'm having.
Right.
Well, not only that, but like not only censorship is always bad, but it's, I think, in many ways easier to describe what net neutrality is. It's the current regime that we live in, and all internet traffic gets treated the same way. Who wouldn't agree with that, right?
Right. Mhm.
But I would argue that very simplistic view is a feel-good concept that
Oh, totally,
is
'cause-
much
And-
thornier.
And every company, every ISP says, yeah, we also believe that. They've all said that. We also believe, we just don't want any rules to enforce anything in case we want to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
Or we're going to treat it all the same way, except the people that pay us more money
Well, we'll treat them a
for
little bit better.
specialty. Everybody gets treated the same way, except that guy. He gets treated the same way even more.
their argument would be, well, we're going to charge everyone the same premium access. So we're treating everyone the same way. They all just have to pay more.
Yeah, I personally don't have a problem with Netflix paying more. I have a problem with Netflix customers paying more.
Right.
So if that's also the debatable argument is Netflix going to end up eating those costs
Right.
if the ISPs make them pay more for faster lanes, or are we? And one of those issues is fine with me, and the other one obviously isn't.
And for me, like, that's a bit of a short-sighted view. Like, it's not, the thing of it is, it's just not Netflix. It's the next company, right? What is the next startup that's going to make it big? Like, is that even going to be able to exist because there are no rules for net neutrality? That's the bigger concern for me.
I'm Crazy Ajit Pai, used car internet salesman, and I'm here to pass the costs on to you. All right, we got to go out on an interesting note here.
Yeah.
I've been keeping this one in my back pocket, and again, we have so many great questions and comments in the chat. We can't get to all of them, but be sure we'll be having plenty more of these debates.
yeah.
Talk more
upcoming.
about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks, everybody. But from Stellar Tech, if net neutrality reaches a repeal, could this potentially create a backlash for an alternative form of internet, a new competitor with a new protocol in communication? This is a really fascinating thought because
Like a separate
the internet
internet?
came out of nowhere. It's like, oh, we'll just always have television and telephones, and lo and behold, we
True.
found a way.
New internet.
It's a very interesting idea.
New internet.
I feel
I
like
don't
that
even know
was
where to
in the
begin with
HBO
that.
show.
That's what?
That was in the HBO show, the Silicon Valley, like a disaggregated internet or non-centralized internet. That would take a really long time, and I don't really see that as a possibility. However, if the providers end up creating such draconian measures that a lot of people really don't like them, it does open the door to other potential ISPs. I can't believe I'm actually going to mention this name, Starry, who,
wow.
like those guys.
Yeah.
So there are some other possible competitors out there, and if things get so bad with your, Spectrum or Comcast, there would be considerable
And just for
incentive
context,
in the
Starry
marketplace.
uses 5G
Yeah, yeah.
technology to deliver internet, just like Verizon.
Yeah, and they've been in pilot, I think, in Boston for a really long time.
Yeah.
It sounded like a really interesting idea. I don't know how far it's actually gotten off the ground, but if the current providers end up doing a really bad job with their customers, people would look, hopefully, to something like Starry.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of a new internet just because I feel like these forms of communication evolve because they're better than the last one, and it just, if this new internet is only like regulation free or it's got open, like it's just net neutrality plus,
Yeah.
I don't think that's enough to like get people to switch over to another internet. Like it just, the idea of like of a new internet. Just,
Roger,
yeah.
where did your attitude about stick it to the man? Come on.
He is the
Not-
man now. You've
That's-
been.
I'm trying to
got
be
old.
objective about this whole thing.
You guys have actually done a really good job, and I do appreciate that as a heart on my sleeve, bleeding heart, knee-jerk reactionary.
That's the thing. I
Well, we need you.
Don't
Yeah, we
tread
need
on
that.
me.
Right.
exactly.
Don't tread on my
I'm just trying to
internet.
offer a little perspective. That's all.
Now, this has been very informative and very helpful. I do feel like we could round up the entire procession with a bunch of quotes from Malcolm from Jurassic Park, including while you were debating whether or not you could, did you ask yourselves if you should? And I'm going to steal this straight from Nicola in the chat. Life finds a way.
Yeah, there you go.
So on that note, it's time to say goodbye for now.
It really is. Wow, we went way over.
Yeah, this was a
Hey.
fantastic episode. And
This
such
was really
great-
awesome.
Such
Love
great
the-
chatter.
Yeah, love the chatter. Love the comments. This is great. Thanks, guys. Good way to end the week, right? Wait, it's Thursday, right?
It
Yeah.
is Thursday.
Good end the podcast week.
Yes.
Yes. I'm working tomorrow too. Anyways, if you liked anything you saw here, check us out on CNET. Our podcast is available on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, SoundCloud, FeedBurner, Google Play Music, and you can access us on Amazon Echo.
And I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Roger Cheng.
BVG. See y'all next week.
See y'all
Thanks,
next week.
everyone.
Woo!